Somewhere well above the clouds, where the thin air allows breeding to some of the bountiest mushrooms on the planet, sits a cave that is home to some of the most rage-inducing moments in the Mario Kart Wii meta. Hi internet! Arc speaking. Yes, today, we're going from countdown lights to checkered flags on the fungi-infected pass, Mushroom Gorge. First up, classifications for Mushroom Gorge are relatively neutral, putting it solidly in the, well, neutral category. With a decent amount of time-saving strats bundled with a level 2 shortcut at the end of the track, widely known as the gap jump, there's a lot of different strategies that this course can harmonize with. Also, real quick, out of the 200 plus comments on the last 2 course Kickstart videos, literally only one person asked how the shortcut levels work. So, Jedi Jess 1, to answer your question, the level ranking is based off the viability of how the shortcut is used in the current meta. Things like how much time the shortcut saves and their respective difficulties are calculated into the levels as well. However, the most important metric is how often the shortcut is utilized and therefore strategized around in the competitive level of play. In true fashion to every normal course Kickstart, let's start with the lines. When going off the start line, you'll want to aim inside the tightest box on the first set. Remember, due to a trait on Mushroom Gorge, the first straight is not quite short enough for just one wheelie. So in a time trial, you'll delay the wheelie a bit after the starter boost. Likewise, if you're starting in a top position, this strategy also applies. Once you get to the first turn, you'll do a delay soft, which is chained into a mixed soft drift, and exit with an insta. If you don't get the chain, then you might not get the wheelie due to the weird topography on the bridge. Then, when you go off the ramp, you'll want to nosedive, level out right before you hit the pad, then drift left onto the pad and trick, and go back to nosediving. All you're doing is drifting off the mushroom pad, which gives less air, and of course nosediving, which gives less air. Once past that, start a slip drift, insta, and aim for the left side of the boost panel. Trick, then nosedive onto the flat portion of the green pad and wheelie off. If you aren't comfortable with doing the shroom skip strat, you could trick off the third pad. However, it is quite a bit slower and only recommended if you're going for a box. Also, a quick note, if you notice sometimes you get way too much air off the ramp, that happens because you're jumping off at the end of the ramp instead of the front of the ramp. Sometimes you can't help it, which is what we call getting gorged. However, the best way to reduce it is to be sure that you aren't going off the very edge of the ramp to the left, as that's the most common spot where people get too much air. And on the other side of that, if you aren't getting enough air on the first pad, that's because you are going too far to the right. Refer to my mushroom pads video if you're wondering about that. Once inside of the cave, you want to get a chain drift from a delay soft into a mix soft insta wheelie, then trick the first ramp. Tail dive slightly onto the first pad, then nosedive onto the second pad and drift to get low air hopefully. Ride the edge of the 2 green pads and, if you can, wheelie. This should spit you out to the low edge of this pad, then you'll want to aim at the dip portion front, left, then right. Lastly, aim for the last grass apex of the last turn, then spin drift into an insta wheelie. You'll need the chain going into lap 2. Now I want to quickly mention something about the grass fringes. In this game, not all turns with grass are the same. For instance, the turn after the first bounce pad has a huge misplaced road collision, meaning you could cut off what looks to be grass, but it's actually road. Different courses, more accurately each turn, has unique fringe properties. However, Mushroom Gorge has one of the most lax fringes in the game, so be sure to use that to your advantage. For alternative lines, you can take the left path where the boost panels are if you think a shock is in play. It isn't that much slower, especially if the people going on the pads get the item boxes. And if you want to get an item or do the wall ride, you could go the left route inside the cave. There are a lot of situational things to be aware of on Mushroom Gorge, so if you're playing in the pack, sometimes it's a good idea to take a slower route for safety or a power item. This track has a lot of shortcuts, however, I already covered the most useful shortcut, the gap jump, in another video. I'll be sure to link that somewhere on the screen or in the description below. However, for those of you who don't want to click off, or maybe need a quick refresher, how you do the gap jump is you shroom a little bit before the edge and aim for this flower in the distance. Then, you press the hop button. Alternatively, if you want to do it hopless, you aim slightly wider, drift into the cut, shroom, then go from a hard drift into a fail drift when you go airborne, while still drifting left. Now for a few, well, not as useful shortcuts. The beginning shortcut is done by using a shroom right before you go off into the grass, then depending on where you hit on the pad, you'll either want to tail dive to the bridge or nosedive and hit both pads. You could also do this shortcut shroomless, so jump off into the front dip section of the first pad, then tail dive to land upon the second pad. The shortcut hardly saves any time and isn't recommended because of how strong the gap jump is. However, I'm sure that there are some rare situations that you'll need to know how to do the shortcut. I just don't know what they are. Also, I'm sure that some of you guys are going to mention why I'm not bringing up the wall ride ultra shortcut for Mushroom Gorge. Course kickstarts are not going to include ultra shortcuts, as the main priority of a course kickstart is to show you the general lines and very rudimentary strategy, just so you could get started playing online. There's a lot of meat on this course when talking about the technical portions of driving it, but despite its fairly balanced characteristics, two caveats hold it back. The first one is terrible respawns. If you fall off halfway through the cave section, you'll respawn much farther back than you should, which makes 2. The shock even more of a busted item than usual, as getting TS lap 3 is all but the most rage-inducing mechanic that this game has to offer. And yet, that ugliness is also the beauty of Mushroom Gorge, as if you're in a top spot most of the time, you are so far ahead when the shock comes, it secures your place. Remember, the player using the shock is going to try to do everything in his power to use the shock so it kills as many people as possible. Meaning, if you're too far out of reach, he'll probably leave you alone. Also, howbeit rarely, sometimes the yellow bolt of death doesn't even show up at all. All that to say that two items stand above the rest when it comes to versatility. I think everyone knows what I'm talking about, but in case you don't, I'm talking about the triple and single shrooms. Since the track has a lot of running elements to it, rather than opting to dodge the shock, most players prefer to outrun it, as typically it's easier to get a top spot if you're always in that prime placement. However, this is just one of many ways to play this course. If you realize too many people are bagging for shrooms, you may want to run if you're in a high spot, or if in a low spot, taking a beating early on intentionally and catching the shock at 30 seconds might be a good idea. Remember, Mario Kart Wii isn't a science, it's flow, an ongoing butterfly effect. And that's precisely what makes it so exciting.